70,000 people, one flat desert, and not a single one of them could move. In September 2023, 2 months of rain fell on Nevada's Black Rock Desert in 2 days, and a 200-square-mile lake bed turned to glue. No cars, no bikes, no rescue trucks after dark. The easy answer is that this place is empty, hot, and far from help. That answer is wrong, or at least half wrong, because the flatness that trapped them is the same flatness that pulled them in. People have entered this ground for 170 years. It keeps closing behind them. So sit with that for a second, because the question underneath it runs through everything that has ever happened out here. Why does the same flat, empty desert that pulls people in, for a shortcut, for a record, for a spectacle, keep turning into a trap they cannot drive out of, cannot walk out of, and cannot simply wait out? The obvious reasons are real enough. It is empty. It bakes in summer and drops cold at night. The nearest real town is barely a town. But if that were the whole story, the Black Rock would just be one more stretch of Nevada nobody thinks about. Instead, it has a death toll that spans centuries, the fastest land speed ever recorded, and a temporary city that appears and disappears once a year. The danger here is not an accident of geography. It is the geography. Start with the ground itself, because everything begins there. The Black Rock Desert lies in the high country of northwestern Nevada, in the northern part of the Great Basin, a place where the rivers run inward and die in the sand instead of reaching any sea. What looks like desert was once the bottom of a lake. During the last ice age, a vast body of water called Lake La Hontan covered much of this region, hundreds of feet deep in places, a cold inland sea that lasted for thousands of years. At its peak, roughly 12,000 years ago, Lake La Hontan spread across about 8,500 square miles and stood some 500 feet deep over what is now the Black Rock Playa, making it one of the largest lakes on the continent. When the climate warmed and that lake drained and evaporated away, shrinking into scattered remnants like Pyramid Lake to the southwest, it left behind what geologists call a playa, a dead flat bed of fine silt and clay, pressed and leveled over millennia into a surface so smooth it barely counts as terrain. Across about 10 miles of that lake bed, the elevation changes by only a few inches. Stand in the middle of it, and you are standing on one of the flattest large surfaces anywhere on the planet. That flatness does something to a person that is hard to explain until you have stood in it. There are no landmarks, no trees, no boulders, no rise or dip to fix your eyes on. On a hot afternoon, the horizon dissolves into a shimmer of mirage, and the mountains ringing the basin seem to float and lift off the ground. Distance stops meaning anything. People have driven in slow circles out here without knowing it, certain they were going straight because there is nothing to steer by. The surface that looks like the safest, simplest ground imaginable, no cliffs to fall from, no water to drown in, nothing to crash into, is the same surface that quietly erases your sense of where you are and how far you still have to go. And there is a second thing hidden in that clay, something you would never guess, while it is dry and packed hard as a runway. The fine sediment of the playa is rich in the kind of clay that swells when it takes on water. Dry, it holds a truck at highway speed. Wet, it turns to a slick, bottomless paste that grabs a tire and will not let go. Hold that detail. It is the whole story, and it does not pay off for another century and a half. And remember one more thing while you hold it. The playa is still the bottom of the basin, the lowest place for miles, the spot everything drains toward and then cannot drain away from. There is a third property of this ground, and it reaches you even when the surface is bone dry, because it travels on the wind. The playa is not ordinary dirt. Its crust is loaded with alkaline mineral salts, compounds of calcium, sodium, potassium, and magnesium, ground down over thousands of years into a powder so fine that individual particles measure only a few microns across, small enough to slip into an engine, a camera, a pair of lungs. When the wind rises, and on a surface this open the wind rises hard, sometimes past 60 miles an hour with nothing anywhere to slow it, that powder lifts off the lake bed in pale sheets and gets into everything, including the cracks of your skin. And it is not inert. Those alkaline salts turn into caustic hydroxides the moment they meet moisture, even the moisture of sweat or tears, which means the dust does not just coat you, it slowly burns you. The people who spend time out here have a name for the chemical burn it leaves on your feet. The point is simple and unsettling. The dry surface is not neutral ground you merely stand on. It is working on you the entire time you are exposed to it. The people who lived here longest understood all of this in a way the newcomers never bothered to. The Northern Paiute knew this basin as home, and their knowledge was not decoration or folklore. It was a working map of where water surfaced, where the springs ran warm or scalding, which margins of the flat could be crossed, and when, and above all, when not to cross at all. They did not drive straight lines across a dead lake bed in the heat of the day. They moved with the seasons and the water along the edges, treating the open playa as something to skirt rather than conquer. That restraint, knowing that the smart move is sometimes to not go, is the single survival skill the desert has punished people for lacking over and over, right up to the present. The first to learn that lesson in bulk were the emigrants of 1849. The gold rush had thrown tens of thousands of people onto the overland trails to California, and every one of them was hunting an edge, a faster line, a way to beat the mountains before winter closed them. A man named Peter Lassen promoted a route that branched north off the Humboldt River, ran through the Black Rock country, and swung down into California. On paper, it dodged the notorious 40-mile desert to the south. In practice, it was a trap dressed as a shortcut. The Lassen cutoff ran roughly 200 miles longer than the established roads, and it dragged wagon trains straight across the driest, most exposed ground in the region at the worst possible time of year. To grasp the scale of the mistake, picture the traffic. In 1849, an estimated 22,000 people were strung out along the overland route to California. Wagon train after wagon train, each one watching the dust of the party ahead and reasoning that if others had gone this way, it must be passable. That reasoning is exactly what fed them into the Black Rock. By late summer, the Lassen cutoff was pulling one company after another off the Humboldt and out onto the dry drive, and the promises that had sold the route began to fail one by one. We know precisely how bad it got because one of the men who crossed it wrote it all down. J. Goldsboro Bruff kept detailed journals and made careful sketches along the route in 1849, and his account is one of the reasons this stretch of trail is among the best documented in the American West. The emigrants had been told the dry drive from the Humboldt to the Black Rock Spring would run about 30 miles. By the time they were on it, watching their animals fail, they suspected the truth was closer to 60 or 80. There was almost no water at a place called Rabbit Hole, and none at all between Rabbit Hole and the Black Rock hot spring beyond it. That is the exact mechanism of the flat as a killer, and it has nothing to do with cliffs or storms. It is distance without water, under a sky with no shade, on ground with nothing to aim for. Picture what that actually looked like. The oxen were the engine of the whole enterprise, and the oxen went first. In one diary account from the route, an emigrant counted 11 dead oxen inside a single mile of trail. The animals dropped in harness, and the wagons they had been pulling, loaded with everything a family owned to start a new life, became dead weight that had to be abandoned where it stood. People pushed on at night to spare the animals the worst of the heat, which only stacked disorientation on top of exhaustion. Long before the gold fields, companies ran out of food, and the record describes people eating the carcasses of livestock that had died along the trail, boiling scraps of leather, chewing whatever they could find. Brough himself ended up stranded through the coming winter in the mountains at the far end of the route. Dinand Quarandemantruk Darinen camped at a spot that still carries his name, guarding piles of abandoned property, while the parties he had helped went on without him. He had been promised that relief would be sent back for him. The relief was slow. The winter was not. Here is what that first disaster proves. The thing the emptiness teaches before anything else. The danger of the Black Rock is not that it attacks you. It is that it offers you nothing, at scale, faster than you expect, with no landmark to tell you how much farther the nothing goes. The emigrants were not fools. They were doing the reasonable thing, chasing a shorter, safer-sounding line at a moment when the coming winter was a genuine killer behind them. The route narrowed their options one at a time, water first, then animals, then the wagons themselves, until the goal quietly changed from reaching California to simply staying alive. And still they came. Wagon train after wagon train followed Lassen's tracks into the same ground, knowing others had suffered on it, because the pull of the shortcut was stronger than the warning. That is the pattern. Remember it, because it never changes. Only its disguise does. But the emigrants were not crossing toward nothing. They were crossing toward a single dark landmark that meant survival. A conical outcrop of black volcanic rock, an ancient limestone that rises straight out of the flat, visible for miles. The very formation that gives the entire desert its name. At its base lay a grassy meadow and water, the first water after the killing stretch beyond Rabbit Hole. The explorer John C. Fremont had passed this way in the early 1840s, and the wagon parties who came after steered for that black rock like sailors, steering for a lighthouse. Here is the cruel joke the geology plays. The water waiting at the foot of the black rock was a hot spring, in places near scalding, so travelers who staggered to it half dead from thirst sometimes had to wait for it to cool before they or their animals could drink. The one reliable landmark in a featureless waste led them to water that could burn. The same geology that built the playa left the whole basin threaded with geothermal springs, water heated deep underground and pushed up to the surface at the desert's edges. Some of these springs look like the most inviting thing for miles. Clear water, a curl of steam, a soft rim of mud on an otherwise blistering plain, and some of them are close to boiling. Double Hot Springs out in the Black Rock country has been measured at around 180 degrees Fahrenheit, with banks that are steep and slick. At that temperature, water does not give you a warning window. It scalds on contact, and if the slick bank drops you in, climbing out fast enough to avoid catastrophic injury is close to impossible. The danger this time is not the absence of water. It is water that looks like relief and works like a trap. That is not a theoretical risk. In 1973, a 19-year-old was scalded to death at Great Boiling Springs, near the little town of Gerlach at the desert's edge. For years, the volunteer fire crews in Gerlach have warned people that certain springs in the area can inflict fatal burns almost instantly, and that the loose, slippery banks make self-rescue nearly hopeless once someone goes in. There is a widely repeated story from around 2014 about a man dying while trying to pull his dog out of a boiling spring in the region, a story that has circulated far more than it has ever been confirmed, and one worth treating with caution rather than passing off as established fact. What is not in doubt is the underlying physics. Geothermal water hot enough to kill a person in seconds, sitting unmarked and inviting on a flat where everything else is dry and empty. And the springs are not a single freak feature. The whole basin is geothermally alive, its margins dotted with pools and seeps at wildly different temperatures, some pleasant, some lethal, almost none of them labeled. Trago Hot Springs, one of the better-known soaking spots along the old railroad grade, has at times been fouled with bacteria carried in by wildlife and livestock. A reminder that even the inviting water can hide a hazard you cannot see or smell. There is no ranger at most of these places, no railing, no sign that reads 180 degrees. There is only clear water on a flat brown plain, and the difference between a soak and a fatal burn is a single step. So notice how the danger has already shifted its shape. The emigrants died from what the flat did not have. The springs kill from what it hides. And as the region got mapped, named, photographed, and eventually reachable by ordinary car, that hidden quality is exactly where the risk migrated. The more familiar and accessible the Black Rock became, the more the real threat moved into the things you cannot see coming. The spring that looks like a bath, the clay that looks like pavement, the flat that looks like it could never trap anyone. Then came the machines, and for a long stretch of history, it looked like they had finally solved the old problem. Trucks that could cross the dry playa in an hour instead of days turned the emptiness that had killed the emigrants into an asset. All that flat, hard, featureless ground was suddenly the most useful surface in the country for anyone who needed a long, level, obstacle-free run. But the solution did what solutions out here always do. It changed what people were willing to attempt, and it carried a fresh kind of exposure in with it. The same flatness that starved the emigrants turned out to be the closest thing on Earth to a natural test track for the fastest vehicles human beings have ever built. To chase the world land speed record, you need miles upon miles of surface that is hard, level, and utterly clear of anything to strike. Because at the speeds involved, a single obstacle is not an inconvenience. It is the end. The Black Rock Playa offered exactly that, more of it than almost anywhere, and it became the arena for one of the most dangerous contests in the world. The modern chapter of that arena opens in 1983. On October 4th of that year, a British driver named Richard Noble ran a jet car called Thrust 2 across the Black Rock Playa and averaged 633 miles per hour, taking the world land speed record. Thrust 2 was built around a single Rolls-Royce Avon engine pulled from an English Electric Lightning, a Cold War fighter, and it touched a peak of roughly 650 before the two-run average settled the official number. Those rules are worth understanding because they govern everything that happens out here. To hold the record, you have to run a measured mile twice, in opposite directions, within a single hour, so that a lucky tailwind can never flatter your time. Noble's record stood for 14 years, longer than almost anyone expected. Keep his name because he does not leave this desert. He comes back to it with something far more dangerous. But before Noble returned, an American with a score to settle got there first. Craig Breedlove had been a land speed legend decades earlier, and he wanted the record back. On October 28, 1996, he took his jet car, Spirit of America, out onto the playa. The run started under control. Then a crosswind caught him, and here the flatness did the thing it does. There was nothing, anywhere, to break that wind. According to the reporting at the time, just before the run, Breedlove had misheard a radio call about the wind speed. Not a harmless 1.5 miles per hour, but a genuinely dangerous 15. At around 675 miles per hour, the car went out of his control, tipped, and careened off course. It slid roughly 2 miles across the open desert. It missed a crowd of spectators by about half a mile before it finally came to rest. Breedlove climbed out shaken, but unhurt. Think hard about what that means. A man lost control of a jet-powered car at nearly 700 miles an hour, traveled 2 miles sideways across the ground, and walked away. On almost any other terrain at that speed, there would have been nothing to walk away from. The very emptiness that had killed the oxen is what gave him room to survive. No wall, no ditch, no tree, just endless flat to bleed off the energy. And the same emptiness is what let a 15-mile-an-hour breeze, nothing at all to a person standing still, become a 2-mile disaster, because across miles of open lake bed, there is not one single thing to slow that wind before it reaches the car. That is the flat as a physical force, not just as distance. It manufactures the very wind that then throws you. The crash damaged the car and stalled Breedlove's effort that season. By some accounts, it remains the fastest automobile crash anyone has ever walked away from. And instead of ending his campaign, it fed a belief that with enough engineering, enough speed, enough nerve, the Black Rock could finally be mastered. That belief got its proof almost exactly a year later, and it is one of the genuinely astonishing things ever done on this ground. The man who came to finish the job was Richard Noble, the same driver who had set the record in thrust 14 years earlier, now running the operation from the ground rather than the cockpit. His new car, Thrust SSC, was a different order of machine, and his driver was a Royal Air Force fighter pilot named Andy Green. They did not have the Playa to themselves. Breedlove was back as well, chasing the same record on the same flat. So the desert in 1997 held two rival teams, pushing jet cars towards speeds no human being had ever survived at close range. Green's first official runs on September 25th averaged just over 714 miles per hour, faster than anyone in history and still not fast enough to break the sound barrier. So they kept going. Then, on October 15th, 1997, everything lined up. Green ran Thrust SSC, a car shaped by the aerodynamicist Ron Ayres and powered by two Rolls-Royce Spey turbofan engines, the kind built for fighter jets, producing tens of thousands of pounds of thrust. Under the same two-run rule, he averaged 763 miles per hour, about Mach 1.02. He broke the sound barrier on land, in both directions, the first and still the only person ever to do it. The sonic boom rolled off the Playa and shook buildings in Gerlach 12 miles away. Guinness World Records recognizes it as the land speed record to this day. Nearly 3 decades later, no one has beaten it. Not on this Playa, not anywhere on Earth. The fastest any human being has ever traveled across the ground still belongs to a single pair of runs on the Black Rock. Sit with the collision of images for a moment. On the exact ground where emigrants once counted their dead oxen by the mile, a man drove a car faster than the speed of sound and lived to describe it. If you wanted proof that human beings had finally conquered the Black Rock, that technology had turned the killer flat into a controlled playground, that was it. The desert had been measured, mapped, and timed to the thousandth of a mile per hour and beaten, which is exactly the moment to ask the question hanging over the whole place. If a jet car can break the sound barrier out here and stop safely, what could this same ground still do to 70,000 ordinary people who are not going anywhere near that fast? The answer is the part almost nobody sees coming, and it has nothing to do with heat or speed or a boiling spring. It has to do with rain on the flattest ground in America, and with that swelling clay I asked you to hold on to. Since 1990, the Black Rock Playa has hosted Burning Man, the event that builds a temporary city out on the open lake bed every year and then erases it completely. At its peak, it draws roughly 70 to 80,000 people into a place with one small town at its edge and a single practical road in and out across the dust. For most of its history, the arrangement worked because the Playa in late summer is exactly what it looks like: bone dry, hard, endless. The perfect blank canvas. The whole thing is built on the assumption that the ground stays a surface. That is the same assumption the racers made and the emigrants made, and it holds right up until the desert changes state. At the end of August and the start of September 2023, it rained. Not a normal desert sprinkle. Reporting described something on the order of 2 months' worth of rain arriving in a day or two. On flat ground that level, with clay that swells, the water had nowhere to go. There is no slope to drain it, no high ground to escape to, no gravel to soak it up. It simply spread across the lakebed as a thin sheet and sank into the clay. And the clay did what that clay does. It swelled and turned to grease. The surface that had held a supersonic car became, within hours, a paste that swallowed a foot to the ankle and packed itself into tire tread until the wheels were smooth drums spinning in place. Every attempt to drive out only carved the ruts deeper and sank the vehicle further. This is the payoff of the detail I asked you to hold. The very same clay, the very same flatness, flipped from the most generous surface imaginable to a trap with no bottom. And it did it on the desert's schedule, not anyone else's. Organizers issued a no-driving order. And that order, sensible as it was, is the moment you can watch the whole system snap shut. Tens of thousands of people were told to stay exactly where they were because moving would only make it worse, and because there was nowhere for a rescue convoy to come from in the first place. The instructions that went out tell you how few options remained. Attendees were told to shelter in place and to conserve food, water, and fuel. The language of a siege, not a party. Route 447, the two-lane paved road that is the only real artery to the outside, was closed. The organizers' own guidance said that if you were determined to leave, you could try walking as much as 5 miles across the mud to reach the road near Gerlach, where buses would carry people on to Reno. 5 miles. On foot. Through clay that peeled the shoes off people's feet. Over the same alkaline crust that burns skin when it turns to paste. The Pershing County Sheriff's Office publicly backed the shelter-in-place recommendation because the honest truth was that there was no faster way out and no fleet of vehicles that could safely drive in. There would be no tow trucks after dark. If you were stuck at night, you waited for the sun and the wind to firm the surface enough to move. Hours at best, and only on a drying day. Think about what a rescue would even have required. Someone has to recognize the emergency, then get authorization to act, then find a vehicle that can physically move on the surface, then cover the distance, then locate one person on a lakebed with no addresses and no landmarks, and finally get them out. And every single step in that chain assumes a ground that can bear weight. In 2023, the ground could not. The wet playa did not merely strand the people already on it. It disarmed the machines that would have come for them. The rain took away the one thing that makes any remote place survivable: the ability of help to arrive faster than the danger closes in. So people did the only thing left. They sheltered, they rationed, and when the ground firmed slightly, they walked out. Some of them hiking for miles across the drying flat carrying whatever they could until they reached ground solid enough for a car. Two of the more recognizable attendees, the comedian Chris Rock and the musician known as Diplo, were among those who walked out and caught a ride once they reached the paved road. When the driving ban finally lifted, the exodus was a single crawling line of vehicles that took 6 hours or more just to clear the playa. And the mud was not only an obstacle underfoot, it was the same caustic alkaline clay that burns dry skin, now wet and packed against the body for days, leaving raw and blistered feet, soaked gear, and freezing nights with no clean way to get dry. The whole country watched it unfold in real time, on phones, from inside the trap. Clip after clip of people wading knee-deep across a brown plain that had been a functioning city 48 hours earlier. The watching changed nothing. That is the part that should stay with you. Tens of thousands of people, visible to the entire world and still unreachable, because the ground between them and the road had simply stopped being ground, and there was a death. A 32-year-old man named Leon Reese from Truckee, California, died during the rain event. This is where the reporting demands care, because the easy version, the desert killed him, is not what the record says. The Pershing County authorities determined that Reese's death was not caused by the weather. It was later ruled an accident, the result of acute toxicity from a combination of drugs and alcohol, so the flat did not kill him. But look closely at what the flat did do. Emergency responders were called to the scene on Friday evening, and because of the extraordinary rain and the impassable mud, access to the area and the investigation itself were delayed. The desert did not create the emergency. It slowed the response to it, and that is the quiet, precise way the black rock turns fatal even when it is not the direct cause. It stretches the distance between a person in trouble and the help that could reach them, until the clock out here runs differently than it does anywhere with a road and a dry approach. That is the reversal that ties the whole place together, and it is worth being blunt about. The surface did not change its character in 2023. It changed its state. The exact same flatness that made the playa perfect for a festival, a runway, and a shortcut is the flatness that gave the rain nowhere to drain, and the clay all the room it needed to seize an entire city in place. Dry, it is the most generous ground imaginable. Wet, it is a 200-square-mile trap with no edge close enough to reach, and nobody had to do anything obviously reckless to trigger it. They did the same reasonable thing people have always done here. They trusted the surface because for most of any given year the surface is trustworthy. So stack it all up because now the system is visible in a way it never is from inside any single story. The geography sets the trap, a dead flat lake bed of swelling clay and caustic dust, ringed by mountains, with nothing on it to steer by and nowhere on it to hide. The weather arms the trap and disarms it on its own schedule. Dry and hard for the racers and the city, then 2 days of rain that turn the whole thing to glue. The ground itself supplies the force, whether that force is a crosswind with a 2-mile runway to build on, water heated to scalding with no rim to warn you, alkaline powder that burns on contact, or clay that grips a tire like setting concrete. Human motive supplies the exposure, and it never runs out. Because the reasons people come are the same reasons the place is dangerous. It is flat. It is open. It is empty. It is perfect. For a shortcut, for a record, for a city of 70,000. Technology keeps changing what people are willing to attempt, from ox teams to jet cars to a metropolis of tents. And every single upgrade carries more people closer to the edge of what the flat can do. And distance does the rest. One small town, Gerlach, home to only a couple hundred people, one paved road, a rescue capacity measured against a territory far larger than it can cover, so that every emergency is governed less by what happened than by how long it takes anyone to reach it. The history is the proof, and the repetition is almost eerie. 1849, and a shortcut becomes a graveyard for the animals that made survival possible. 1973, and a spring that looks like relief kills a teenager in seconds. 1983 and 1997, and men chase the fastest speeds on Earth across the same ground, one of them thrown 2 miles by a breeze, another breaking the sound barrier and walking away. 2023, and 70,000 people learn that the most mapped, most celebrated, most photographed desert in America can still close its hand around them in a single afternoon. Different eras, different machines, different reasons for being out there. The same trap, waiting for the same conditions to line up. Within days of the 2023 flood, the playa did what it always does. The wind came back, the standing water sank and evaporated, and the clay dried and cracked and hardened until it could hold a truck again. The ruts and the drag marks and the countless footprints baked into a scarred but solid crust, and then even those began to blow smooth under the same wind that carries the dust. Gerlach went quiet. The desert went back to looking like the safest, emptiest, simplest ground you could ever hope to cross, which is precisely what it has always looked like, right up until the moment someone believed it. The permits for the next year were already being filed. The racers were already studying the surface. The tickets were already spoken for. The flattest trap in America was open again, dry and patient, and the people were already on their way back.